One of the things I decided to give up for Lent this year was social media. I'm not on Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok, so that wasn't so difficult. But I was a regular on Twitter and Facebook. But my reasons had to do with the way both platforms have, in my view, become an open invitation for the smackdown, the takedown, call it what you will. But the habit of focusing on one thing about a person and rallying around a public shaming of that person, competing for the most clever comeback in 240 characters. I know many people, including myself, use these platforms to stay in touch with family and friends or to learn about breaking news without turning on the television. Still, the temptation to participate in that downward spiral of negativity has, for me, often overshadowed its more positive uses, so I just decided to shut it down. I share this because I couldn't help but think about the way John's gospel, the story of the scribes and Pharisees trying to create a gotcha moment for Jesus, has been read and reread, interpreted and reinterpreted as a story about a woman taken in for adultery. This is one of those gospel stories that seems to take on a life of its own, with tremendous works of art that are depicting the story and elements passed down that really aren't in the story, like Jesus writing the sins of all those gathered in the dirt with his finger, only when a part of that, Jesus writing in the dirt with his finger, is actually a part of the story. And I'm struck by the way our interpretive imagination, or perhaps lack thereof, has assumed what the scribes and Pharisees claim is true, that this is a woman caught in the act of adultery, and somehow she deserves the shame and fear of being dragged to the temple, placed in the middle of a crowd of people, and condemned to the death. And based on our belief in that assumption about this unnamed adulterous woman, we've read the story as one of human sinfulness and divine forgiveness, of the grace that transcends judgment and condemnation, a morality tale of what not to do. Don't commit adultery. Don't condemn others. A tale of go and sin no more. But I hear something very different in this story. Something tells me that that's not the whole story. The timing of the story is not lost on me. Happening just after the chief priests and Pharisees had sent guards to arrest Jesus the day before, and not long before Jesus, an innocent man, would be handed over to the Roman authorities on false pretenses to die a shameful death, a crucifixion, a public death reserved for the criminal to terrorize others to stay in their place, to uphold the status quo. He had just spent the night on the Mount of Olives before coming back to the temple in the early morning to teach the people. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the only ones who accuse the woman of adultery are the same men, scribes and Pharisees, who are also trying to entrap Jesus with his response. Jesus is the object of their scorn and displeasure. The woman is the objectified means to that very calculated end. We don't hear from the woman until the end of this account, and only when Jesus asks her a direct question to which she responds. What if we were to hear from her earlier in the story? Would she say that she had not done what she had been accused of doing? What if she were an innocent victim of sexual assault, blamed for a violation against her? Would she even have been believed? She was caught in the act of adultery, the story tells us, but where was her partner, who, according to the law, would be condemned to the same death? Was she set up, entrapped by the same men who sought to entrap Jesus by his response? And what if she were caught in the act of adultery, of having sex with someone outside the bounds of the law? Is such a transgression deserving of public shaming and death? These are the gaps, the silences that I hear in the story. As I consider the questions that the silence provokes, the story is opened up as a radical reimagining of power and privilege, of woman's subjectivity against a world of objectification, and of Jesus's accompaniment and solidarity. In this telling, I can't help but think about the women dragged into the square for a public shaming in our own day, based on assumptions of their sexuality. For women of color or trans women, for example, being hypersexualized in our society, portrayed in ways that underscore the supremacy and purity of white women to the inferiority and sinfulness of Black and brown women's bodies, and the extent to which our society will go to protect that dichotomy. In this telling, I can't help but think about women caught in the wars waged by men, used as objects to take other men down in their vying for power. We know all too well how rape is used as a weapon of war, whether it's the Congo or Ukraine. Some Christian theologians, including Calvin, explain away the scandal that Jesus enacts no punishment, no condemnation for an adulterous woman, that he just lets her go. In fact, many sins have asserted that although Christ remits our sins, he does not subvert the social order. Yet why is it not equally scandalous that the religious power structures of the time could have accused an innocent person, condemning her to death just to prove a point? And what responsibility do we hold in undoing the systems and structures that make it all too easy to drag a vulnerable person to the middle of the square to be stoned for all to see? Do social media platforms serve as our 21st century public venue where assaults and accusations abound? I worry that our shame about this story has been misdirected. As we journey through these final days of Lent, I pray we have not become so desensitized to the harm done by powers, principalities, and privilege, because we are so much more focused on shaming the individual sinner, usually one serving as a scapegoat, than dismantling the powers and structures that make such shaming all too easy. The words of the prophet Isaiah remind me that God makes possible the seemingly impossible. This is a God who, in the African American spiritual tradition, makes a way out of no way. Our God refuses to participate in the shaming, objectification, and trickery. Our God ignores the gotcha question and instead writes in the dirt. Our God honors the humanity of those whom the world would shame. Their stories are strikingly similar to me, Jesus and the woman accused of adultery. The scandal exists in the manner they were treated by men in power, so ready to be handed over and sacrificed for the supremacy of their systems, religious and legal. Maybe we too are complicit in the scandal if we choose to read the story. If we choose to read only from the story, Jesus' response toward a sinful woman. In taking a step back, perhaps we can see the scandal of the bigger picture. And then, without judgment or condemnation, continue to journey toward the prize of God's upward calling.